Welcome to the Exoneration Nation podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Scott, and today I have one of the key individuals that allowed me to get my freedom again. And, having a non DNA case was pretty hard because it's two things that had to happen: new discovered evidence or somebody coming back confessing to the crime. But even after bringing both of those to the Criminal Court of Appeals, mine was still denied until Mr. Craig Watkins became my district attorney, and he started this agency called the CIU, Conviction Integrity Unit. And Mr. Hammond was a part of that group. Mr. Hammond.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Chris.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
That's good. So tell me about how did the CIU actually get started?
Well, in 2007, it was initiated, and they brought in Mike Ware, a prominent defense attorney. I was chosen to be the investigator because I was already working in the appellate section, working on appeals. We had a group of students that looked at 400 cases, and out of those, there were several DNA cases, which we started out with, and then we began to see how, through the DNA cases, how unreliable eyewitness identification was. And that's when we started looking at non-DNA cases, the possibility. And fortunately, your case came up and was our first one, and we had initiated the investigation on it. And we started looking at some of the facts that came in and some of the testimony that was not allowed.
Right.
And we just reinvestigated it and talked to a lot of people that had not been talked to that should have been at the time because they were known at the time of the offense.
Right. What was your experience like on the Dallas DNA series? Was there any cases featured in the series helped or hurt by the publicity?
None that I know of. I think it really opened up a lot of people's eyes and realized the consequences of a wrongful conviction. It doesn't just affect the person that went to jail. It affects their family.
Right.
It affects others. In one of the cases, Philip's case, the real guy wasn't apprehended, and he went out to California and committed 28 other offenses. So you have 28 other victims and all of their families that were affected.
Right.
And that personally bothers me as a law enforcement officer because you want to have justice for your victim,
Right.
but not at the expense of someone else. Because if you don't get the right person, then that original suspect that committed the crime, he's still out there committing additional crimes.
Right. What do you do now for the Dallas County?
I'm still in investigations. I'm one of the supervisors. I supervise the Family Violence Division and 5 of the district court investigators.
So when you was with the CIU, how many cases did y'all cover per year?
We looked at a lot of cases. It takes a while to investigate those.
Right.
Of the years, I was in there 11 years, and I was involved in approximately 24 exonerations. I think we had a total of 30, but some came in that didn't require a lot of investigation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I was personally involved in a little over 24.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. It is.
That's a lot. So do you think things has changed since then?
Well, first of all, the eyewitness, the photo lineup procedures have changed, which they've been improved, and I think hopefully law enforcement officers are more conscious. Personally, I would like to see in every police academy or law enforcement academy class some time devoted to wrongful convictions.
Right.
We have put on cases through the Actual Innocence Conference that's held. And so that does bring in other law enforcement agency. But I think anytime you have new rookies, they need to learn, even if an exoneree doesn't appear personally, that a case is presented so that they can understand the consequences of, their actions, and always keep that in mind. I remember our first case that we got, we went out and talked to then retired homicide investigator on this murder. And we went to that person's house, and before we even walked in and sat down, as we're walking in, that person says, well, I always thought it was 50-50 whether he did that or not. I'm thinking 50-50?
Wow.
Why did you file the case?
Oh, my God.
know?
Right.
So,
oh, man,
gosh.
that's crazy.
Certainly disheartening.
Right. Have you ever seen cases where you thought the guy was innocent, but turning around, he ended up being guilty of the crime?
No, there was a case early on where this inmate professed that he was innocent, and the DNA proved that he was not, and he was just gaming the system, which in turn took time away from us on a
Right.
valid investigation, and so that was disheartening. But there, what can you do? There's no consequences to that.
Right.
And that was one of the cases. Rocky Morris, that was on Dallas DNA.
Mm-hmm. How can the justice system in Texas improve on a national level?
Well, I think that every district attorney's office should have a conviction integrity unit, however they want to name it.
Right.
And also going back to having cases presented in academy classes, and make sure people are always aware of what's going on, because you really want, the goal of law enforcement is to make sure the right person, seeking justice,
Right.
as, the motto for the DA's office, it's not necessarily to convict someone, but make sure justice is done. Because if the wrong person's jailed, there's no justice.
Right. Right. So after, say for instance, guy get exonerated, but the real perpetrator is still out there, do y'all seek to find that individual that actually committed the crime, or are we just like, well, we got the guy exonerated, we might as well just leave the case alone?
No, the goal is still to make sure the right person is incarcerated, and we've been able to file cases. Our office has been able to file cases on the real perpetrators. In one case, when Russell Wilson was the chief prosecutor in the CIU, we identified two people that had committed this sexual assault. The wrongfully convicted people were filed on for sexual assault, so we couldn't file it because of the statute of limitations. So Russell had them, since they shot the victim, Russell got them re-indicted on attempt murder, which has no statute of limitations, and
Right.
we prosecuted them, and they both went to prison. Sometimes when you can't do that, and the statute of limitations is expired, and we've done this in several cases, our office, Mike Ware, went down and to approach the legislature about a new law called the DNA-supported suspected offender law. And that's where if you identify someone in a criminal case through DNA, then you can petition the court to get a hearing. And then that person goes on their criminal history as an addendum, not as a conviction, but it just says this person was involved, and gives the agency that you contact, and that information can be used in future punishment phases as a previous bad act. But there's some steps you have to follow through. You have to have all your lab work. You have to do an affidavit before the judge, and fingerprints and everything, and then the judge approves it. And then it gets sent to Austin to Crime Record Service, and they put that addendum on that real perpetrator's criminal history.
Oh, okay. So have you ever had what was the hardest case you ever had to investigate?
Wow. I don't look at them as either hard or easy.
Right.
Some just take more effort.
Right.
You don't want to make the same mistake. You don't want to, find out something. There's been cases where there could have been a potential other suspect, and so you follow that lead through until it dissolves, and so you're looking at the right person.
Right.
Some of the cases that have been hard have been where we couldn't prosecute the real person, and they're still out walking free.
Okay. So what did you think about the show up lineups?
Well, when you have a 6-person lineup and you lay it down there for the person to look at, it's been shown that if they do go through who's the best fit, a process of elimination. And
Wow.
instead of doing it singly where they eliminate a person individually. And also with the blind administrator, you have somebody that's not involved with the case. They present the photo lineup, so they can't say anything,
Right.
To influence or sway the person or give some nonverbal clue that, oh yeah, that's the person we wanted you to pick out.
Right. So during a trial, and I'm saying it because this happened in my trial. If an officer presents information to the judge and the prosecutor that they think they had the wrong people, and if you was the investigator on that crime, what would be your steps after the cop came forward and say, hey, these are the individuals that we thought that did it? Shouldn't we go and see or even ask these individuals questions or not?
Yeah, you go ask questions. I think that's the good thing about the CIU is that when I was with the CIU and that if you have information, then open it up. If somebody needs testing and they're filing a petition to be tested, and that it can be dispositive as either he did it or he didn't.
Right.
Let's just do it.
Right.
Join in that writ for the DNA testing. We did that in numerous cases.
Because I say that because me and Michelle Moore, we just worked on the case. I investigated this case for 7 years. 7 years. And we finally got him a DNA, and it comes back to be it's our guy. After fighting for 7 years for this guy, and it ended up being him. So is it the system fault, or is it just a person that's trying to get over fault?
I'm not sure if it's a fault. It could be a factor contributing to the problem. I mean, I don't know I know if it came to our office that it would be let's test it.
Right.
And see. It's not so much, I know with our office, it used to be years ago that, the focus was preserving the conviction.
Right.
Well, now it's, let's make sure the conviction is good. The President Chief's, Cynthia Garza, I mean, she's been with the unit many years and that's her focus now.
So I remember when you came to the prison and picked me up and brought me back to Dallas County. I want to say, what was your take on me? Did you actually, did I show you that at that particular time that I looked guilty, or that you thought that maybe this guy could be innocent because now I have to pass a polygraph test?
On those cases, I'm usually I'm disinterested. I'm not drawn because I know, it could be the
either
guy,
or.
and it could not be the guy. Yeah. So, I try to be neutral and, I want to hear what you have to say. Took the polygraph, and we already had evidence, that was looking, we had talked a lot to people and stuff. And, we talked to that one witness who had dated DMike, in your case, the real guy. And, she had come forth and said that, he had stolen her gun, and yet her testimony wasn't allowed in the first trial because it was ruled that it was hearsay. And, so I was always pleased personally, being a longtime law enforcement officer, when corrections were made, because law enforcement is a profession. If there's a problem in the profession, I want to see it corrected personally. That's my personal take on it. Right.
Like even in the Stephen Phillips case, they said the guy's eyes was like green, and Stephen Phillips' eyes was a whole totally different color. So why didn't they just, do the right thing and go after a person that they didn't match the description, because Stephen Phillips and the guy's eyes were totally different colors?
I know. Stephen's eyes are green, and the real perpetrator, he was had blue eyes, and that was always used a German Luger, and that case troubles me from the standpoint of Sidney Goodyear, the real perpetrator, he was identified in one of the offenses that occurred in Dallas County, and the agency actually got a warrant from him. And then another agency that was zeroing in on Stephen dismissed it, and all of a sudden that warrant went away. And when I talked to that agency and talked to that investigator who had since retired, he didn't remember the case. I'm thinking, well, no, that case was too high profile
Right.
not to remember it, know. And so when we identified the DNA from the victim and that it wasn't Stephen, and we told the investigating officer at that time, it bothered me that his first words out of his mouth was he attacked his victim by saying, oh, well, she probably had a boyfriend and that's his DNA and she didn't want to come forward with it and stuff like that. And we said, no, that's not the deal. And when it came back to us, then we identified it through DNA as a CODIS that it was Sidney Goodyear's. Well, he had died, but fortunately the autopsy had been done, and I went down to Galveston and got his blood card, so that they could do a verification and stuff. And I asked this investigator, I said, you knew about Sidney Goodyear from this other agency.
Right.
Why didn't you pursue that? And his comment was, well, we didn't know where he was. And I'm thinking, well, and I told him, I said, well, he's out in California doing 28 other offenses.
Wow.
Yeah. Those things are disturbing.
Right. It's sad that, we have to go through what we have to go through.
I know.
Just for people to try to think, and find the truth. Because all along we was telling the truth, but we just didn't have the right people to believe us. Do you believe in polygraph tests?
I think they're a good tool. I think that they're not necessarily, they're not admissible, but it's a good tool. I mean, we used it in your case.
Right.
We used it in other cases.
Right.
I took you, you took your polygraph, and we got you a hamburger on the way.
Right. Yeah, like that. I think like that was one of the best times for me, and it showed me like how times was changing. Some law enforcement individuals are good people. Because when I went to prison or when I went to trial, I don't think it was a nice person in the courtroom to us, but the bailiff. Mm-hmm. I remember the bailiff because he had been there for a long time and he remembered us. And then he was the bailiff when I got convicted, and he was the bailiff when I got exonerated. And he was like, hey, man, I remember your case. Yeah. You know what I mean? I remember you. Congratulations, things of that nature. It was one of the best moments of my life. And then when you bought me that hamburger, you didn't have to. But when you did, it made me feel good. Like, man, things has got to be changing, because there's no way I would have thought of, officer of the law would be buying me, a hamburger or things like that. I want to thank you again for, doing that for me and making me feel comfortable.
It's just a human act of kindness. That's all it is.
Right. See, but we don't have that. And if we had more of that, I think the justice system would be even better. Would you say so?
Yeah, I agree. You can't prejudge people.
Right.
You have to go with the evidence and stuff. And a lot of these cases, there was no evidence, or they didn't follow through. In your case, we found out that in the neighborhood, a lot of people knew who was doing those. There was DMike and Alonzo Hardy.
Right.
And Alonzo Hardy told us, he said that, he had heard when somebody got arrested for that, they were kind of bewildered that, well, why did they get arrested? There's no evidence. We did it.
Right.
He wasn't going to come forward and say, hey,
right.
you got the wrong guy, not too much later and when he got sick. But, I saw DMike a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. I was on another investigation. He was up on a street off of 35.
Mm-hmm. Doing the same thing he was doing back in the day.
Probably. And, he sees me and I go, hey, DMike. And he was kind of surprised. I said, yeah, from the exoneration case. And then he was like, we're old friends. We're not friends. So.
Yeah. That's one thing that really shocked me, that when they went to trial and they was only offered 5 years, and I was, given a capital life sentence.
Right. I
didn't think it was fair. And I felt like, they should have did just as much time as I did or more. why do you think that they didn't get but 5 years and I got a capital life sentence?
I don't know. I wasn't involved in that portion of it and stuff. I was probably on another case, and I never really inquired that much. And I just really don't know. I agree though. He should have got more. I don't think he should be out there on the streets right now. But
So would you say it's fair for a person that was wrongfully convicted and they have the actual individual in going to trial? Because it happened to me. When I went into the court building, I was asked to leave the court building. For what reason? What reason do you think the court asked me to leave the court building when they saw that I came into the building, the courtroom, to listen to I think it was DMike sentencing or trial?
well, I didn't even know that. I didn't know that you were denied access.
Yeah, they escorted me right out the court building. Yeah, they said I couldn't be in there. That I would, I don't know, influence the jury or whatever. They just didn't want my presence in a courtroom, and they escorted me out. And I was like, I thought the court was open to the public.
Yeah, yeah.
So why is y'all? I mean, they had cops escort me out the courtroom.
I have no idea. I didn't know that you couldn't be in there.
Yeah, that what surprised me, and I was wondering, was it a
Yeah.
new law that was made, or it's just they felt like I would be a distraction?
I don't know. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, that's insane. You familiar with the Richard Miles case?
Yes, I worked his case.
You worked this case. Good. So what do you think about the evidence that was withheld that could have got him eventually acquitted in his trial?
Well, it's like any other case, and that's why now, because of the CIU, when we have a case, we get copies of the entire investigative file, not just what they send us. We go into the agency and we make a copy of the file so that doesn't happen. We'll see notes in there that if another suspect is named and stuff. But yeah, we talked to, I worked Richard's case. We identified the fingerprint card and found out that the guy whose fingerprint that was on the top of the car, I investigated him and found out that he used to own a vehicle similar to the one that was seen leaving the scene, and actually going through some old ticket files where he got a ticket in another city. And then I turned it over to Dallas, their cold case unit, and they brought that gentleman in, and he gave a story, and then they put him on a polygraph, and he failed.
Wow.
So, and then there was the other suspect that was actually the topic of the note that was found in the file by Centurion Ministries that was down in Florida. He could have been the suspect too. He was involved. He admitted that he was at the club that night and heard about it, but he denied any, responsibility or involvement.
Right. When cops come and testify, and say, for instance, I'm on trial, cop come testify, it's nothing linking Christopher Scott to this crime. The only thing that's linking him to this crime is her word against his. Now, we know when you say that, it's supposed to be hearsay in the court of law. Why do you think sometimes they overlook hearsay in the court of law?
I don't know. I don't know what they based that on. I don't, if there was something extenuating circumstance back then that the judge didn't allow her to testify about DMike. I just don't know.
We'll talk about like jury panels. Have you ever been part of a jury panel? Have you ever been called to be on a jury panel? Did you go?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you think about it?
Well, we listened to the evidence and, found the person guilty. It was a burglary case, and the evidence proved that. But I was watching it closely.
Okay.
In fact, when they were doing voir dire and they were talking to me, and they knew that I worked for the Dallas DA's office, and this is a different county. And so I got picked, and I was kind of surprised.
Right.
And even the judge said, you look surprised when they called your name. I said I was,
Sure. So would you say it should be proven that everybody should have jury members of their peers on the panel?
Yes.
So when it doesn't happen, do you consider that being prejudice?
I don't think so. It depends. They have questionnaires these days, and I think they, try to really scrutinize, the person.
Right.
So, they just, we have cases that get found not guilty all the time that you think, that I believe that are guilty. The cases I worked, they've been not guilty. And but I think all attempts should be made to make, a jury panel get the best qualified jurors.
So if you wasn't an investigator, what would you be?
If I wasn't an investigator, I don't know. I've been doing this for so long. I never
considered anything else.
No, not really.
Do you think that it's getting better in our criminal justice system from prior years?
I think so. With with the institution of the Conviction Integrity Unit, the first one in the nation back in 2007, I think it's changed a lot. I know a lot of people watch these crime shows and
Right.
are looking for DNA and
Right.
things like that, and that's not always the case. So, I think our jurors are smarter.
Right.
Are better informed than they used to be. And I think a lot of that is because of the innovations that these district attorneys have put forth and stuff.
Right. So when you see, say if you're watching a TV show and it's about wrongful convictions and they show you how they can, get a exoneration in, 1 week or 1 day, compared to it takes 20, 30, sometimes 40 years to get an exoneration.
I know that's TV,
Right.
So
Right. See, but a lot of people believe that
oh, sure.
because, in some cases that I've worked on, people like, hey, I seen people get exonerated, in less than a week or a day on TV, and you got to really explain to these people that this is TV. This is acting. It's nothing like this in real life.
Exactly.
So should we challenge Hollywood about stop putting it on out here? I know we can't, but we need to have some kind of understanding to the people that, listen, this doesn't happen overnight. This is Hollywood. It's totally different. But a lot of time people actually believe what they see on TV, and what Hollywood is doing is actually real.
I know, and there have been efforts to show realistic stories, but then a lot of it is just make believe,
Right.
And just people have to realize that, and they can read the headlines and
Right.
see the real story.
Did you enjoy being a part of Dallas DNA?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, the first day, we were driving somewhere to the lab, and I was kind of nervous with the camera right there in the car.
Right.
Almost ran a red light, so had to hit the brakes.
Okay.
But it was interesting. I mean, I wanted to present real life to them. I wanted people to understand, what it really is to investigate something and how serious a situation it is, because you have someone's life,
Right.
that you're talking about,
Right.
and they have a family,
Right.
So
when Craig Watkins got elected, did you actually think he was going to win, or you thought it was a toss up, or you were like, "There's no way this guy is going to win in Dallas County"?
I don't live in Dallas County,
Okay.
so I don't get involved in the politics. I knew
Right.
going to work after I retired from a local agency, I knew that, instead of having a police chief for the same, for 20-some years as I did, and going to a political position, that, things were going to change, and, people get elected and to choose not to run, and things change. But and I really like the current Judge Creuzot as the
Right.
DA. I really respect him just from when I knew him as a judge.
Right.
And I know he's the head of the agency, but, as a law enforcement officer, who you really work for are those victims out there.
Right.
And then you need to stay focused on that. You can have politics in and out and stuff like that, but it's important that as a law enforcement officer, you stay focused on your victim. And as long as you do that, you're going to be okay. You stay out of politics, respect the people and pray for the people that supervise you. but you take care of your victims.
Right. So do you think politics plays a big role in what goes on in our court system?
I don't think so. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen
that.
that. But I'm not at that echelon, I'm
Right.
I'm a worker bee. Through these exonerations, we have seen factors, not only with law enforcement officers and detectives, but with, defense attorneys. I don't know how many times, I had a person that we were looking at their case said, well, I really didn't see my defense attorney very much.
Right.
They were appointed. And with, there's been some instances where some judges made some bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are a lot of factors and a lot of personalities that fit into it.
On a personal note, have you ever watched a trial, like sit in a trial and felt like the guy was, in your eyes, he was innocent, but it seemed like they're really trying to push him to be guilty?
I've never seen that in Dallas County. Even when I was a law enforcement officer, I was always confident in the cases that I filed that the person was guilty.
Right. So have none of your cases ever came back as being a wrongful conviction case?
The only case I was peripherally involved in was one of the cases where out of the department I was in, when I was in CID, somebody said, well, the person was seen driving a car like this. And I said, well, so-and-so drives a car like that. And he got wrongfully convicted. And but that was my input. I did not work that case. But when they were talking about suspect car and this person, had a criminal background, and you have to follow that lead out and see which way it goes.
Right.
It could be like eyewitness identification.
Right.
They just looked at the wrong.
Right.
And who can tell? A lot of GM products. They have different lines, but their cars are similar.
Right.
So
I always say that when our case was being investigated, that the investigation wasn't good, because if the investigation was good, we wouldn't be in the position we in now. What do you take?
In your case specifically, there was information out there as to who were pulling these robberies. That wasn't the only robbery they did that night. Right. That was, in fact, that was the second time they'd been back there, because the victim recognized DMike and fired around, and it went through Alonzo Hardy's jacket.
Right.
But, better effort could have been done. DMike, he took off to Houston. He had a girlfriend down there.
Right. And
Alonzo Hardy had a relative or friend that was a truck driver, and he got in the truck with him. They went to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And, but, we talked to people. We talked to the woman who said DMike took the gun and stuff. And so that information was out there, and it was just, frustrating to me why it wasn't followed up.
Yeah, that's why I say, investigation of those cases are the most important, because it's things that you can miss, like cops could miss, because it's always, I think, given to like the first responder. The first person on the scene gets to kind of run the investigation or run, through the crime scene. And I was thinking, like, Alonzo Hardy jacket got hit. Shouldn't it be some kind of leather off of his leather jacket that's on the floor or somewhere in that house they could have found, but just didn't want to look for it?
Well, my question was, why didn't, when the information was out there about DMike and Alonzo Hardy, why weren't their photo lineups shown up?
Right.
Pictures.
Do you think cops get tunnel vision?
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm. Why? Why do you think they get tunnel vision?
I can't explain the psychological effect on it,
right.
But yeah, I don't think so much anymore, because that's really been taught now.
Right. So if you had one thing you would want to change about the criminal justice system, what would it be?
Like better informed law enforcement officers.
There you go. Right.
And going back to what I said about the police academy, and have recurrent training.
Right. Yeah, I think that's too, because I used to go to Collin County, and my thing was, we need to do prevention instead of, locking people up. What can we do before we lock them up? We need to set up some kind of prevention thing. And I was always said, like, allow us to go to academies, cadets, and explain to them how our case happened. It could be so different from, say, you got a white kid, Plano, but he got, the 27-inch rims on it. He got Jerry on. Would he be quicker to be pulled over? And, when you see an African-American guy with the same kind of car, same kind of Jerry, or whatever the case may be, driving in not a good neighborhood, is there discrepancies from racism? Do you think it's systemic racism going on?
I really can't address that.
Right.
I don't. I think people have their biases.
Right.
From the standpoint of, I see it as going back to my biblical beliefs.
Right.
You have good and evil.
Right.
And you have bad people and you have good people.
Right.
And so I think, and they hire law enforcement from the human race, so you're going to have problems.
Right.
You can't call everybody out.
Right.
That's I've always often thought that in a lot of these exoneration cases, if the first line supervisors in those investigative units had maybe scrutinized, had a fresh pair of eyes on the case before it got filed, would it have helped? Right. I know in one case that I talked about earlier where the person said, well, it was 50-50. I always thought 50-50 if he was guilty.
Right.
So then doing more research on those two investigators, I found an article in one of the magazines that gives a best and worst, of the year, and they were rated the worst investigators. I'm thinking,
right. What do you think about the recidivism rate?
I think, you have district attorneys now, including Judge Grisot, has taken steps for programs to cut that recidivism rate back. I thought it was great with the exonerees that the other exonerees, when you all had your findings hearings, stuff like that, they were there to lift a hand. And like your efforts to make it easier for people to transition, and Richard Miles, giving people jobs and stuff like that. So, you want to get them help or so that they get off that, treadmill heading back into prison and stuff. Right.
Well, Mr. Hammond, I want to thank you again for coming out, giving us some of your time, and you're much appreciated. Hopefully I can get you back on my show again, and we can talk about some more positive things that's happening in our criminal justice system. And glad we have guys like you that offer to get individuals hamburgers and make them feel comfortable. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.